Hi, I know most of you already, but I'm Krista. Like Alex said, I used to be one of the youth program's co-directors. We were actually the first two to be co-directors at Louisiana Right to Life. Beforehand, it was always one person, so that we were the first two to have to learn how to work as a team in the youth programs department. Since leaving Louisiana Right to Life, I've had 15 jobs. I'm currently running a Newman Center, or a Catholic Student Center, here in Los Angeles, where I'm in my office right now. I had a lot of adventures, like Alex said, and the topics that we're going to be discussing today, which is mostly leadership, but a little bit of communications. What I'm going to be sharing today is from my education, for sure, because my first degree is in public relations. My second degree is in psychology. Everything that I've learned from my time at Louisiana Right to Life to now has been really from the adventures of my many jobs. So I've been in nonprofit, I've been in the church, and I'm currently working for the church. I worked for Waiter, so a little bit of corporate world. I was also in high school education. I was a teacher before COVID, and I was doing other things too, little odd jobs. Had a praise and worship band. I was a barista. What is the other thing I was gonna say? Did I say gymnastics coach already? Okay, so I did a bunch of little jobs between 2019 and now, and I will say a lot of what I learned about leadership has been in those little odd jobs that I've had since leaving Louisiana Right to Life. So I want to share one story of servant leadership first before I kind of dive into the topic. I just want to illustrate it for you. At least for me, in the time of COVID, I think COVID is such an interesting time because, you really saw not only individuals for who they were, but you saw companies. And so many companies went under because of COVID, because they weren't able to adapt and they weren't able to work together as a team. And some of my favorite restaurants died, like Randall's in Lafayette. I did hear they're reopening, though. It was one of the places that I used to go Cajun dancing back home. I didn't get to say goodbye. The week they closed, they were like, we're closing in 3 days. And I was like, no, I'm coming in 4 days. It was really sad to see some of these, especially great restaurants from my hometown, closed because of COVID. But some of the greatest leadership I ever saw was during COVID as well. Like I said, one of my jobs was working as a gymnastics coach. And it was at this little place in Broussard, Louisiana, of all places, right down the road from where I used to live from my house. And like many companies and small businesses, a lot of people were taking out the PPP loan, right, so that they can keep their employees. And at that time, the head coaches and the owners of this gym, Mandy and Eric, I remember that they decided not to take any money from that PPP loan, and they wanted us to still remain at the amount that we were making per hour. And they just believed so much in their gym, which, it's not like a nonprofit like Louisiana Right to Life or the Newman Center, but they believed so much in the quality of their gymnastics, and especially in a competitive field like gymnastics, that to have a positive environment for young children and athletes to grow and flourish as in their sport. So they believed so much in their gym that they didn't take pay during that time so that we could. Again, these are owners of a gym, and they had been operating for a number of years, and they were continuing to grow. And so COVID was a test, I feel, for that company, for that business. I feel they're continuing to succeed because of what they did during the time of COVID. When I think of servant leadership, I could make this a religious talk because I work for a Newman Center, and I'm sure most of you probably have some religious background because it's Louisiana. I don't for sure know, but I think it's safe to assume that. I could easily say, the higher you go, the lower you go, and look at the leadership of Jesus or Mary. But I'm going to say the higher you go, the lower you go. Look at the leaders of this business, the owners of this business. They chose us, their employees, before themselves, and they chose their business. They were co-owners, and they chose, to continue going and to adapt. And we were doing gymnastics lessons over Zoom, which is difficult to do because it's a sport. But yeah, they were at the highest form of leadership, and they took the lowest place for us so that we could still make money during that time. So I thought that was my greatest visualizing. And when I think of servant leadership, I really think of Mandy and Eric and what they did for us coaches at this little gym in Broussard. Another thing that I think of servant leadership, and like I'm going to tell you in a second why we're talking about servant leadership. I've been really thinking about the virtue of being meek, and that's not something that I understand, because I feel like I'm not like a meek lamb person. I'm like a tractor bulldozer person who is like, I'm scary to walk through doorways with, and I mean that like literally and metaphorically. So meek is not something that I ever would have described myself as until maybe now, because I think I have a better definition of it now. One of my priests told me, no, meek is not necessarily just being like a lamb. It's like being a lion who knows how to hold back their roar. And that's something that I really resonated with me. There's times where I have to learn how to hold my tongue, especially running a Newman Center. There's certainly some type of politics where 2 or 3 are gathered in Jesus' name. There are what? Politics. Been times. There are times where I have to trust higher ups in the church and the authority and people who have been at this parish longer, for instance. And one of my priests here told me, like, don't burn bridges too quickly. Like, be willing to bite your tongue right now, and then when you have the chance to prove yourself or prove the Newman Center, you'll have that opportunity later. But don't burn the bridge now. And that's this quality of meekness that I see in servant leadership. And one of the fathers here, like I said, who told me that, like, he ran like something like a Newman Center 10 years ago or so. And he was telling me that it was very difficult for him because he's opinionated. He's strong-willed, similar to me. And I think that's why he's reminding me to temper myself, even though, I mean, I'm an activist. I care about justice, and like I want things to be just and right. He's reminding me, like, when the time comes, it'll be the time. And that's been a hard lesson for me, especially maybe in a place like Los Angeles, but we can talk about that later. So to kind of go into the next point, I want to talk about humble determination. This is a phrase that I got from this book, Radical Candor, humble determination. I'm going to call that the virtue, okay? And the opposite of virtue is vice, and it's not just one vice, it's 2 vices. It's a continuum. This is Aristotelian philosophy. So there's a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency. So if humble determination is a quality of servant leadership, a vice of excess, can anyone guess what a vice of excess would be? There'd be too much humble determination, or even just determination. If you have too much of that, what would that look like as a vice? Too much determination.
I said like aggressive ambition.
Aggressive ambition. I like that. I was going to call it proud autocrat. Aggressive is a good word for it. Being too proud, a mentality of I know best. Like, it's good to have determination, but when you get to a point where you want to like basically work alone, you'd rather work alone and be proud, be the only one making decisions. When I was a teacher, whenever I went to a Catholic high school and I was a campus minister, they called me dictator for the first full month that I was there. And it was definitely because I came in kicking and screaming and like, okay, let's go. I had this mentality that I knew best, and they certainly taught me that I didn't know best. But that is a vice of excess. So again, humble determination, vice of excess, proud, autocratic. Vice of deficiency, not enough determination. What do you think that looks like? What would you call that?
Laziness.
Unproductive, laziness. I want to call it spineless reservation. I really like Hamilton.
Spineless reservation.
Spineless reservation. So it's kind of this mentality that, you so go with the flow that you have no opinions, right? I love the musical Hamilton, okay? What does Hamilton say, Burr? If you stand for nothing, Burr, what do you fall for? So being spineless and like acquiescing to everything, that's the other kind of vice. If the true heart of servant leadership is humble determination, then both of these other opposites are problematic, right? And they won't work for a team. Sorry, did I interrupt someone?
Yeah, sorry. It froze for some reason.
Okay.
You said humble determination first time, and then
Okay, I was just going to say humble determination, if that's the virtue that we're going for, then both of these extremes on either side are going to be problematic, especially for a team working together. So I'm giving all these kind of individual things for you to discuss and think about as an individual. These are my last 2 points about servant leadership before I talk about it as a collective, as a group that which I love that is growing, by the way, because before it was just me and Alex. The fact that this is a growing team is beautiful. and needed. So last two things, servant leadership, for you to think about and chew on. Culture of honor. Having a culture of honor. When I worked at Waiter, I had a boss who met with me every 2 weeks, and at the end of our maybe 30-minute meeting, because we met so frequently, she asked, what do you need and how can I help? What do you need and how can I help? Now, I was editing menus. It wasn't like high stakes, okay? But, you know, if I was like, hey, I'm really struggling with Mediterranean menus, then she would partner me with someone on a Mediterranean menu that I wasn't, you know, familiar with the language of, and she would help me with this very specific thing. And because I asked very specifically, she was able to help me very specifically. But it was because she had a culture of honor, and there was a level of trust that we had between one another, that I could share what my weaknesses were, but that she could point to and help me hone in my skill set for that. Like I said, for that job, it was menus. The last point, servant leadership, is being replaceable. If any ministry or any program or anything hinges on one person or two people or a small group of people, it will fail. It cannot hinge on you. You need to be replaceable. And that is the heart of servant leadership, because it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about having a shared vision. So let's go into, these are, again, individual points that I want you to think about. Let's talk about it in the form of a collective, which this is what it is. This is what you are. You are a group of people working together. What does servant leadership in action look like? Number one, oh, sorry, Father. I'm giving a talk right now. I'll come later. That was my boss. Bye, Father. Okay. What does servant leadership in action look like? Okay, number one, the best part about servant leadership is that you model it. If you can perfect it within your group of people, you model it for your students. Because this is the context that you're in. You're serving college and high school students. You need to model what it means to be a leader and what it means to collaborate and work together, despite your differences, despite your opinions. Alex and I were blessed because we're very similar. And there were only two of us. So it's a lot easier to work with just one person than it is to work with two or three more people. There's a level of interpersonal communication that it was much easier for Alex and I to have. I've told Ben many times, you are so lucky that we are who we are, because the first time we met, we were in DC together for a week. That could have been really bad. That could have been really, really bad.
It could have.
But it wasn't. We got lucky. He hired two people with very similar hearts and who are recovering from being the oldest daughters. The number one point that I think is needed is that you model what you want to instill in the students. You have to model yourselves. You have to be a model of. Okay, 2, servant leadership in action means having a shared vision. A shared vision. So what are you acquiescing to? What are you being subservient to? Not to Alex, not to each other, but to a mission. And you need to have that mission in mind. Maybe it's not even something that y'all have really explicitly discussed. And it's okay too if vision changes, because the needs of 2016 youth programs time were probably very different than 2023 youth programs. So what Alex and I were dealing with at that time is probably very different. I mean, especially after the Love Life campaign and the Amendment 1, I know things have changed for Louisiana and for youth programs and the discussions and the way people are talking about things. I'm sure COVID has had an impact on the way youth programs are running, young adult groups are running, clubs, how clubs are operating. I'm sure all of that has been different just because of COVID. So it's okay if vision changes, but it has to be shared. You have to share the vision together. And maybe this is something you talk about once a year. Maybe this is something you talk about every 2 years. Maybe it's something you talk about when you get a new youth programs co-director. You determine that. But you have to have a shared vision and a shared view. The best leaders, which that's what you are leaders, and I think you already know that. But the best leaders are not so concerned with being right as to getting to the right answer, and which means sometimes being wrong. I really think data and feedback is really important. Data and feedback is very important. I know they do some, or at least when Alex and I were there, we were doing them after every single camp to take in maybe even having select students that you have trust with, which you have to build and nurture. When you have those relationships with some of those select students, for us, the Haley Guths, the Joseph Zarangs of our time, when we have that level of trust with them, they're able to tell us what fell short because they share in the vision too, the students. So let them. One example of shared vision that I really enjoy, and I think everyone probably in any kind of political job enjoys, is Scalia and RBG, right? I saw an interview where Scalia, they were getting interviewed together, and he said, "What's not to like about her?" I mean, except her views of the law, of course. And so they disagreed so heavily on I mean, the interpretation of the Constitution or whatever, but ultimately they had a shared vision for the good of the country. And I think that's why they were able to have such a friendship. And I think there's something really beautiful about that you can have a shared vision with someone that you disagree entirely with. Again, I think that's what made them such profound leaders in this country. That's something that we can look to and try to emulate. I kind of referenced it in this last one, shared vision, but the next one is like nurturing your relationships and fostering appreciation in one another. So when you can see the dignity in the people that you serve with, even when you disagree with them, there is fruit from that. Because even if I work in ministry in Los Angeles. I work in Catholic ministry in Los Angeles. You can probably imagine how many shades of Catholic there are in a city like Los Angeles. And there are people who I way disagree with, who, do things that I think are low-key very problematic. There's liturgical abuse left and right. I have had to let go a little bit of not who I am, not what I believe, that there are people in ministry that we're not going to be totally 100% on the same page, but I'm still going to do ministry with you because at least we're doing ministry together, like there's something that we can share. I think there's a lot of conversion that can happen in relationship and in friendship. And that comes from fostering an appreciation for even people who are different than you. It's certainly been a culture shock and hard for me here in LA, but there's a gift of being universal. There's a gift to the pro-life message, not only being for religious and Catholics, but for non-believers and of other faiths, of course. That has to be nurtured though, and that's how you build trust, and that's what servant leadership looks like in action, is that if you're each building trust with different communities that you're a part of, and guess what? If you're a part of different communities, then the message is getting further. It's spreading more. So the more diverse of the people at the table, and I'm not talking about just race or gender or all those kinds of things, just the more diverse, and even the way that you want to teach a certain thing, then you're bringing more to the table by being diverse, and you're inviting more people to the table, which is so necessary in bringing this universal message. So celebrate your differences, celebrate the ways that you disagree. Because the last thing that servant leadership in action and among the group of you, what it does is it activates. It makes people want to join. It makes people stand up. It makes people more likely to speak up, more likely to speak out against abortion. It's going to help not just y'all, it's going to help this mission, again, that you are subservient to, that you're agreeing to be subservient to. Even if it takes a long time to get to that place of agreement, it activates other people to be a part of it when you diversify and bring people of all different strengths. So first point, servant leadership for you as an individual is do you land on one of those other vices, or is humble determination something that you're able to embody? Servant leadership in action, really taking into account what it would look like for every single person on the team to be a servant leader, and what the good effect that would be, not just for you as individuals, as a group, but for the mission and perpetuating the mission. Couple of practical tips, and this is something that I think Alex can take afterwards and hopefully continue this conversation. I don't want to just be here for one talk and then that's it. I think this is something that can be continued. There's 2 books that I recommend. One is called Difficult Conversations, and the other one is called Radical Candor. So I'm going to give a couple of tips from both of them. Difficult Conversations. Let's go with that one first. This is a book that when I worked at Waiter, we would week by week read out of this book, and there was scripts in it, so we'd read it and then we'd basically dissect the conversations. What parts of it were good, what parts of it fell short, and we did that together as a team, because what I did at Waiter was edited And so because we were the editors, we were the ones that came in and like with the red ink. Those are difficult conversations to have. What's that?
Said I would not want that job.
So we were learning how to correct people all the time, basically. So that's, a difficult job. But here's some things that I learned from my time at Waiter and from the book Difficult Conversations. Number one, remembering the culture of honor, right? You honor one another for being subservient to the mission, and for that person sometimes having a different gift than you that they're bringing to the table that maybe you don't even understand, but hopefully you can honor the gift in that person and have enough space to even listen to what they're saying without bias. That's hard. I know that's really hard. And like even from basic persuasion training, right? You say it back, clarify. What I'm hearing from you is XYZ. Is that correct? When you're having those difficult conversations, sometimes it's better to take the back seat and let other people drive. I know, like, I've had difficult conversations with former roommates like Jacob, and I think he knows my little method now. Usually it's, you go first. Why don't you tell me what you think is happening, and like let it all out, spill it. I want you to say everything that you want to say, and I hear you. That's what happened. That's what it felt like this to you, and when I did that, you felt like that. So being able to be the person who goes last, right? So when that would happen, I would let them say everything they needed to say, and then, once they felt heard, which is very important, they felt heard, their voice was heard, then I say, hey, can I tell the truth now? Like, there were some misconceptions here, and can I say what was true? So it's true that I did this and I was wrong and I apologize. And this is where I was coming from with that. And so when you can take the back seat, let other people drive, be willing to switch lanes, if we're going to continue with the car analogy here. Sometimes you're not the one in charge. You're not the one in the driver's seat. Sometimes you're the one just taking in the view. And it takes a true servant leader to be able to do that first sometimes. Like I said earlier, like using data and feedback is really important. I'm sure y'all are still taking those surveys at the end of each camp, for instance. Sometimes the difficult conversation might be with Alex. So Alex is someone that you report to, I'm sure. True servant leadership is even being able to go to Alex and say, hey, Alex, this didn't work. Not just being the recipient of data and feedback, but being the one to give it in a constructive and useful way. Because if you're just like, spouting out truth without love, it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be good. So Alex, actually, if you want, you could put that little arrow thing that I sent you. Could you put that on a board or something? Or you could just text it to everyone right now. That'd be fine. The last thing about difficult conversations I would say is it's not about you. Sometimes it's not about you. You have to acquiesce to the shared vision that you have set. Hopefully you've communicated that in advance. And you have to let go of what you believe for the sake of the mission or for the sake of the team or the teenagers or the college students that you serve. And that's very difficult, much easier said than done. All right, so this is my last point. I feel like I've been rambling for so long. I'm going to try really hard to get through Radical Candor. This is an entire book. This little axis here, so we have care personally, up and down, and challenge directly. So Radical Candor is the sweet spot, that is the quadrant that you want to be in. These are the mathiest terms I've ever said in the last 10 years. So let's just celebrate that for a second. All right, let's start with obnoxious aggression. So that's the bottom right quadrant. Okay, what is obnoxious aggression? So it's basically being challenging without caring. It's being challenging without caring. So it's criticism not to improve, but instead to humiliate or degrade. That's zero care, 100% challenge. Obnoxious aggression, not helpful. All right, let's go to the left of that. Manipulative insincerity. Okay, so that's, you don't have care personally for the person and you don't want to challenge them. So this is kind of vain. Whenever you're not willing to challenge people, when you're not willing to put people, kind of like raise them up, raise the stakes and say, hey, like you could be better than this. And in fact, I think this is even most harmful when you win, okay? So when you do well and you don't criticize, or give constructive criticism, give radical candor, that can be problematic too, because sometimes people are like, well, I care about the team, so I don't want to give any negative feedback. I don't want to make them feel bad. That's problematic. That's problematic because people, even when you're on a winning team, I'm sure some sports analysts are still looking at their wins and how did they win? How can they replicate that or do that better in the future? So manipulative insincerity is whenever a leader is too vain to actually care to challenge. Sometimes, not all times, okay? Sometimes being a leader is being willing to piss people off. Like the truth hurts sometimes. Like if you're telling someone something about a weakness of theirs, like for instance, one of the people that I work with is still in grad school. There are times where he neglects his schoolwork, but then it affects his job, and I have to be the one to say like, hey, it worries me during finals week that you're neglecting your job. I love you. I know that school is important to you, and ultimately you need to go finish that and go do your job that you're going to do when you finish your master's program. You need to get a grip of your time schedule. You need to be better, and you need to not pull all-nighters, because it affects not just you, not just your school program, but this job and the people that you serve. So people deserve the best of you, and that's not it. Manipulative insincerity is where you pretend to care but you don't, because you're not challenging people. Okay, next one. Ruinous empathy, top left quadrant. This is when you care almost too much about being nice, about getting along, and it's when you care a lot about people, but again, you're not challenging. So you care so much about being nice that you remove any element of criticism. It's kind of like the manipulative insincerity. Manipulative insincerity is more like you care about your image. All right, you care about how people perceive you. So it's more about vanity. Ruinous empathy is actually more harmful to the people that you serve, like the people you collaborate with, or for Alex, like the people that you guys who report to her. Consensus is not really always possible. So I think leadership, like if we're shying away from ruinous empathy, leadership is sometimes Alex listening to all the things that all of you have to say about a program and then her making the decision about it. So not her trying to say, oh, but I want you to agree with them and them to agree with them. No, it's Alex being the leader, and she has the decision-making power. And ultimately, hopefully everyone felt heard and everyone had a place to say what they had to say, but you don't get the decision-making power. Alex does. Ruinous empathy would be Alex trying to acquiesce to every single person in the room when she can't. She can't. She's the one that gets to choose. So what is radical candor? Radical candor is sometimes just non-judgmental commentary. So it's being truthful about things. It's saying you don't have to always build exactly the perfect relationship before you could get to a place of radical candor. Radical candor can be from a stranger on the street sometimes, but it is important to be very clear, because clear is kind. So when you're clear, that is a very kind thing. And I think that's where those ruinous empathy, manipulative insincerity, like it feels like you're being mean if you give criticism. That's one side of things. But the other side of things is where you're giving too much truth, and it's aggressive, and you're trying to like basically stand alone and be a one-man show when you can't. The program's not going to last if you're the only one standing. It can't hinge on you. It can't be about you. So you have to learn how to communicate with one another with radical candor. Highly recommend this book. Highly recommend Difficult Conversations, so that you can work together as a team under the guidance of Alex and be servant leaders and perpetuate the very worthy mission that you share. Thank you.